Welcome to the D-Shift podcast, where we provide inspiration, motivation, and education to help you transition from the challenges of divorce to discover the freedom and ability to live life on your own terms. Are you ready? Let's get this shift started. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the D-Shift podcast. And I am really excited to have a fellow Canadian on the show today, but also somebody who does something that is very unique in the approach to dealing with this. So I want to introduce you to Karla Combres. She has this amazing background that I'm going to share with you right now. I'm going to read it so I don't mess it up. Karla is a professional who is a celebrant and a legacy guide who helps people living with presence, meaning, and connection. Through conversations and community workshops, one-on-one guidance, and custom ceremonials, she creates spaces where people can pause, reflect, and shape a life and legacy that they are proud of. And those of you who have listened into the podcast know that I am a huge fan of William Bridges and his book, Transitions, even though it's a much older book now. I still think that whole idea of celebrating rites of passage through different parts of our life is so important. So, Karla, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Mardi, a fellow Canadian.
Yes,
and I'm on the other side of the continent.
I am very excited. There's always, it's always nice to talk to people from your home, from your home country, I guess. Let's put it that way. Karla, this whole idea of guiding people and having celebrations around life issues that maybe people don't associate with celebration. Like when we think of a celebration, we think of an anniversary or a wedding or a birthday or a promotion. We don't often think of celebrations for some of the more challenging things in life, which I know is something we want to talk about. But before we get into all of that good stuff, tell us a little bit about why this became your area of focus.
Sure. Well, it's a circuitous route, so I won't give you the whole story. But I will say that when I was a little girl, if you'd asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, I used to say I wanted to be a part-time preacher, part-time teacher. That was just what came out. It's like I always knew that at some point I would be companioning people through thresholds. I am not a religious person, didn't grow up in a religious household, and I don't believe that we need to be religious to really mark something in a meaningful way. And I think, the people I work with are people of any faith or no faith. Often the things that we work on, there is no prescribed sort of dogma of a way to meet the situation. Certainly ceremonies around divorce were not a thing until more recently.
Right.
And I just want to kind of give a little bit of nuance to that. You were using the word celebration. I would maybe phrase it a little bit more differently. And I think some of these words, they're so loaded, like ceremony, ritual. For some people, that feels, too solemn or too this or that. And there can be joy, there can be grief. And I think it's important to honor both, or the complexity of emotions, not just make something a celebration and not also honor what the future might hold in like a forward-looking kind of way to mark an ending.
Yeah. And thank you for that, because I quite often use terms. I'm very particular at the terms I use with my clients in kind of my area of focus. And I really respect that I may be incorrectly using terms. So I really do appreciate that kind of feedback and nuanced response. Because here's where I think I got that from. Now, a lot of times people bypass a traditional funeral and they have a celebration of life. And I think that's where I got that, that concept.
I think you're absolutely right. And there are these divorce parties too. And I think there's this trend both with funerals and with divorce parties, right, to bypass the grief. And I actually didn't answer your first question, was how did I end up here?
Yeah.
So I'll just kind of finish that off. So I've always been a person drawn to meaning making, spirituality, connecting deeply, entertaining the big questions in life without necessarily looking for the answers. And back up about a decade and a half ago, I had two of my three babies at that time. And really felt drawn to start doing something different. I'd been a federal bureaucrat for years and wanted to do something more meaningful. And I did a real deep dive into end of life work, which has now shaped everything going forward. So I, started volunteering with hospice, then doing hospice trainings, then became a funeral celebrant, started hosting community events, normalizing conversations around death and dying, sang at the bedsides of the dying. So a real deep dive into that, which started to give me this sense of the power of really being present at that time of life. And the gift of dying can be that you become really clear on who matters and what really doesn't.
Right.
And so in any kind of work that I'm doing with anyone, it's about trying to bring that clarity, that, why wait until the end of your life to have that clarity? Bring that into any kind of threshold that we may be navigating, and even bringing it in on the daily.
Yeah. Yeah. So I do really believe that. I think that there's a reason why I'm going to call them rites of passage, but that's not the right word either. But milestones. Let's say milestones, and milestones can be positive or negative, right? We tend to think of them as achievements, but they can also be, completing a season of our life, or completing a relationship, or completing a project. I mean, there's all these things that can happen. And I do see that there can be space for grief and space for optimism and joy and possibilities at the same time. But that can be challenging to navigate that as an individual on your own. And that's where I see somebody like you being able to create that sort of that space, and that really unique experience for the person would be so valuable to help them move through this.
Yeah, I think that's definitely what I try to do in my work when I'm working one-on-one with people, or with a family or a community.
Right.
And then the other work that I do, sort of bigger, we'll get to it in a little bit, but these regular community conversations that I host is about sort of practicing that presence, practicing articulating the narrative of your story, and receiving others, and gleaning insights from others' stories. Because, when you are going through something, it can feel so singular, like I'm the only person. Yeah. And I mean, every one of our stories is unique. There's no one who's actually navigated the same thing. But it's amazing how much we can see ourselves in someone else's story, and glean insights from it, and in the telling of our story, shaping something new. I think you called them milestones. I think that's a beautiful way to put it. I like thinking about, well, you're from Canada, maybe you'll recognize this metaphor, and hopefully other listeners will too. But in the far north, if you're, out navigating on a big lake, you might see these stone cairns, these stacked stones that were meant to help with navigation. Like it's saying someone has been here, and, you're on the right way or whatever. But it's like that stopping on your journey, just pausing to notice, where have I been? Where am I now? And where am I going? Rather than just kind of blasting through life and getting to the end going like, what the hell just happened here?
Yeah.
It's really being mindful and stopping and taking stock along the journey. And then when you do that, when you create a practice of doing that, of pausing and not rushing through and being present to, then you can integrate your stories, and you don't become defined by this one thing that happened to you. It's like part of your larger narrative.
Right. Right. And I know, Karla, one of the things that you help people understand is why, or and I'm assuming you do this with groups as well as with individuals, but why is it that loss is something that we have as a society? I'm going to say kind of as a North American society, because I don't know if, I'm sure it's not the same for all groups within this, but why do we want to just skip over loss? Like, we want to just put it as quickly behind us as we can. And we don't seem to have the rituals or the traditions around that whole experience of grieving and grief that other cultures seem to still have and value. What do you think is going on there, and how does that impact people?
Sure. I think there are a few different reasons. A lot of things converged at once. We're a very multicultural, multi-faith society, and so we don't have one kind of language to fall back on when it comes to loss. one, unifying language to fall back on. Also, more secularism than ever. So as people have maybe stepped away from religion, they've kind of thrown the baby out with the bathwater and assumed they didn't need these things anymore. And the other thing is, just with modernization, we have been distanced from death, sort of the ultimate loss.
Right.
We've been distanced from that. We used to even, in many parts of the continent, even 70 years ago, dig our own graves, vigil at home for a few days after a death, lived in multi-generational households. And so with that distance and that sort of corporatization, industrialization of the funeral industry, we've kind of forgotten how to be with that.
Right.
And I think, that's the ultimate, of course, death. Here we're talking about divorce and separation, but all of those things help us practice being with loss, being with our own mortality, giving us a sort of a wider perspective on life. I think that's a very healthy thing for us.
And I
So
think
there is a movement, thankfully, to reclaim that and to
yeah,
become more participatory in it.
yeah, and I thank you for that. And I think one of the things that I find is hardest to sort of prepare my clients for, because I work with people contemplating divorce through to getting their divorce. Like I'm really in the strategic part of it. And then, yes, I do a little bit of support afterwards, but I'm not a life coach and I'm not a relationship coach. And, I don't do that, rebuilding on the other side. But it is, I think a lot of people, especially if they filed for the divorce, they assume they're going to go through the divorce and they're not going to experience any grief. They're just going to be thankful that person is out of their life. And even in situations where it was very toxic, even when it was an abusive relationship and very unhealthy, and the person realized that and got out because of their safety concerns, there's still grief sneaks up on you after the event. Do you find that with some of your clients that it's almost like grief and loss takes them by surprise after like a big life transition, like a divorce?
You know what? What comes to mind immediately is a few different couples I've worked with who are getting married. And in our conversations in the preparation for that new rite of passage, this new beginning, there's still some residual grief from the past or regret or shame
Right.
that we need to work through before they can really step fully into the new. So again, it goes with this idea of, pausing along the way and honoring this part of your journey is so important. And it can look so many different ways. It could be a community gathering. It could be in your living room with 4 people. I think it is important to be witnessed, whether that's by me or, or people in your community, but having a container around it to truly honor what was. So in those situations, through conversation, they did some letter writing, may never even send the letter, but just like getting the word on the page of what
Right.
they are experiencing. And then actually subtly incorporating in their wedding rites some kind of cleansing ritual that the community didn't even necessarily all know about, but the couple did, and I did. And so even that felt like enough to honor this new beginning, to sort of symbolically be releasing residual guilt or shame or regret from the past.
Right, right. And I think the other emotion I'd like to throw in there is anger, because I think if you're not, anger and I think anger and grief go together a lot. Like I know, for instance, when my second husband passed away, I was very angry at a lot of things that had happened. I mean, I've been his caregiver for like 7 or 8 years before he passed away. And there was a lot of just stuff that I was not happy with. And even though I was grieving his loss, I was still angry at him. And I've spoke with a lot of women who are widows who, and a few men who are widowers whose spouse has passed away suddenly, like unexpectedly. And quite often there is grief and anger at the same time at that whole situation happening. So I can see we're getting rid of that if you're stepping into a new relationship, or just if you want to be more present and have a healthier relationship with yourself. I'm guessing letting go of all that is important.
Yeah. I mean, I think anger is such a powerful emotion and something to be worked through, I think, long before you're probably ready to
Yeah.
really step in fully and to something new and bring in that love and joy.
Now, Karla, you mentioned something really interesting. This whole idea of storytelling or creating a narrative to mark this passage in your life or this transition or threshold. Can you talk a little bit more about that, and how is storytelling different than just unloading everything on your friends and family around you? Because that's not what you want to do either.
Right. Well, I would say, we are storytelling creatures. We're meaning making creatures. It's through story that we find understanding, that we connect with each other, that we start to construct this sort of larger narrative around our lives. It's how we transmit what's important intergenerationally. It's really key. And anytime I'm working with folks, we always start with story, whether it's clear that our destination is a particular ceremony around a particular threshold or not, whether it's kind of more nebulous, like we're navigating some kind of transition, not sure what to do with it. Story is like a beautiful gateway in, and in the telling, and not only in the telling, but so a couple of years ago, I was running these memoir writing workshops, a small container, very intimate, and people mostly came because they were saying, like, my kids want me to write my story, they
Right.
want to know my story, they want me to capture it. Like, you see all these StoryCorps, all these like storybook offerings out there, and it is a powerful thing, but it adds this whole element to have your story, to tell it out loud, to have it heard and received by someone else. That element of witness, I think, that comes in ceremonies, in the storytelling. It just helps to break us out of sometimes this rut that we can be in the way we tell it. We don't even realize that we're telling it. So when we bring that presence to it, we start to see that actually our story can be told so many different ways, and it doesn't have to be the way we've always told it.
Right.
It gives us options. It gives us nuance. And again, like I was saying before, we start to see it as part of this larger narrative that actually even goes before us and long after us, if we were really to zoom out.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Yes, it
I hope
does.
so.
And I think that leads nicely into the idea of being in a safe community. And I'd like you to talk a little bit about the community that the communities that you create, or the community that you have created that supports people through this, because this is a different option than therapy, because therapy has a very specific realm. Therapy is looking at the root cause of the issue and helping correct it, looking from the past to the present. Coaching is different too, because it looks from the present to the future. You are really talking about this unique transfer or inflection point in life, or pivot, or threshold, or whatever term people might want to use. So tell us about your community first, Karla.
Sure. Yeah, I would love to. Well, twice a month I host these online free community conversations called The Heart of Being Human. It's a gift for me to the world, and to give. And also I feel like it's helping me to articulate what is at the core of what I do. Because there's the, memoir writing stuff, there's weddings and funerals and divorces and baby blessings and retirement. We're constantly navigating. Life is all about change, right?
Right.
And so if I were to speak to each of those things individually, I seem very scattered. But when I really think about what is connecting all of the work that I do, it's getting at the heart of being human, at living life with presence, in community, finding meaning, creating meaning. And yes, I think it's a very powerful thing. I've been listening to some of your podcast episodes, which are wonderful, by the way.
Thank you.
And a lot of people are offering communities for people, divorce groups, or for groups. And I think those are so important, for a person to be able to surround themselves with others who have navigated the same thing. And I also think it's important to cultivate community just around our shared humanity.
Mm-hmm.
And to feel less alone, because we see that others are going through other changes, have their own challenges. They might not have the exact same story as mine, but in their story, somehow I can see a bit of mine, or I can get some wisdom from my own story and offer them.
Yeah.
So anyways, these Heart of Being Human calls are the second and fourth Thursday of every month, noon Eastern. And it's a chance to, it's unscripted. It's really a chance to practice that presence, listening, sharing, receiving. And it goes far beyond small talk. And
Yeah.
it's, like you mentioned, it's not therapy, but definitely therapeutic to be in a community of people who really want to connect on things that truly matter.
Yeah. And I love the idea of people that are experiencing a similar sense of this movement in their life, but not all on the same topic, because I do feel that sometimes specific kinds of support groups can become sort of an echo chamber where you're just talking, like everybody's talking the same and everybody tries to kind of group think on everything. Whereas if you're able to have different perspectives and different issues that people are bringing to the community and the conversations, I think you're right. We can see ourselves in other people's challenges and also see strategies that have worked for them. And you're thinking, okay, well, that sounds like something maybe I'm not going through the loss of a parent or something, but I see how I could incorporate some of what they're doing or he or she is doing into my life. And it's such a rich, I'm sure it's a rich conversation for everybody when they're in there. And that is something that you are kindly offering to the listeners today, to come into those groups if they feel it would be helpful.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So you can find out more information at my website, which is karlacombres.com, or simple way to remember it for those particular community conversations is it's just at the heartofbeinghuman.com, heartofbeinghuman.com.
And that information will be in the show notes. So just under Karla's biography, you're going to see a little for Karla's gift, and there'll be a link there if you want and information on when those events are happening. Karla, these conversations go so fast, and it's always so inspiring to have a guest come on and talk about a very difficult subject in a very inspiring way. Because let's face it, whether you're talking about death or the loss of a relationship, these are not easy conversations to have. So thank you for sharing this in such an uplifting way. What is the one kind of word of wisdom you'd like to leave everybody with today to help them just kind of moving forward?
Sure. I think since most of your listeners are navigating separation and divorce, I would just say the way that you meet this moment in your life is the way you might meet everything in your life. It shapes how you will meet everything in your life. And so inviting you to slow down, to be present with what you're feeling. There are no wrong feelings, to be present with it, and to somehow cultivate some community around you with trusted people who can witness what you're experiencing in a non-judgmental way, who can see beyond this moment of your life and help you to see beyond and see that bigger story of your life beyond this one experience. I think that's what I would say is just it's an opportunity to really practice presence and connection and meaning making, and your life will be richer for it because you will then have those tools for going forward for the next inevitable transition.
Yes. What a great uplifting message. Karla, one more time, if people want to find out more about what you do, how do they find your website? And I'll make sure this is in the show notes as well, but I just want to have you give it again.
Karla with a K and Combres, Combres, and it's just my name, karlacombres.com.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Karla, for sharing your wisdom and expertise and just kind of giving us a gentle nudge into how we can be a little bit more effective in handling these life transitions. So I'd like to thank you, and I would like to thank all the listeners for your time and for coming in and listening to this episode. And don't forget to tune in to the next D-Shift podcast. Thanks for listening and supporting the D-Shift podcast. If you would like to attend live trainings by our amazing guests and have a chance to ask questions and get answers from our experts, join the D-Shift crew. For more details and to sign up, head on over to www.divorcecoachforwomen and click on the podcast page.